All right, Steve Palmer here with Lawyer Talk. This is our guest series, but before we get to that, a couple things about Lawyer Talk. We are expanding our horizons. It's called Lawyer Talk, of course, but as you may have seen by now, by all the content that's going up on Channel 511, that's Channel 511, we just like to talk. That is, I'm a lawyer, and I like to talk to interesting people who do interesting things. And that is why now I would like to introduce Burton. Burton, good to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Burton, why don't you tell them who you are, what you do?
I'm Burton Harruff. I'm from Sunbury, Ohio. I'm a knife maker, and I got a small graphics company.
All right. Well, Burton didn't. What you didn't tell them, and we're going to get to this, but I got to tease it now.
Okay.
You've just been. Can we call you nationally famous?
Oh, I don't know if I'm nationally famous.
All right.
I was a recent contestant. Yeah.
A recent contestant on Forged in Fire, the History Channel TV show.
Yeah.
And I confess, until just a month or so ago, I had never seen that show or knew much about it. But my 12-year-old son loves it, and has been dying to get me to watch it with him, and I started to. Now, you don't just build knives because that's what you did on that show, and we're going to get into that here later on in our series here. But before that, I should probably point out that you have done work right here for Channel 511. So I have a bit of a self-interest in what you do and how you do it, but it's not just knives. I mean, you're more of an artist, I think. And how'd you get into that, and what do you do?
Yeah, I suppose the graphics is my day job. I started off in the college, in fine arts. I'd always been a drawer, painter, artist like that, and switched over from fine arts more to digital design on the first Photoshop, Illustrator, all those. And,
the Adobe series.
Yeah, the first editions of the Adobe series, and switched my major over to that, and then it's easier to make money, I guess, as a graphic artist than a fine artist in today's.
Let's start at that on that side of it. What is the name of your graphics or your fine art business?
The graphics company is Central City Graphics. I guess this is the fourth year, getting close to the end of the fourth year full-time of doing that full-time on my own. I'd started a few years before that, but it was kind of a side thing. But as it built, I was working 8-hour days doing the same thing, and then coming home and taking off and doing the same thing, and I didn't really have time but for the knives, and I'm like, okay, something's got to give here. And
you started your own shop?
I started my own shop, and it's a struggle being a small business owner and trying to work through I've got more of an artist mentality than the bookkeeping, and the money is kind of harder. The invoicing and the QuickBooks and stuff's hard for me to do. I
think a lot of people take that for granted.
Yeah.
Who actually don't run a small business, and I appreciate it, because on the artistic side, you've got to do. You got to go express yourself, and whether it's for hire or whether it's on your own, I imagine there's a process that you go through.
Yeah.
And that might be quite different from billing, invoicing, keeping a schedule, keeping the books.
I got to really force myself to do that stuff a lot of times.
And until businesses get big enough where others can take care of that, it's tough to keep on top of. But people may recognize some of your work right here, huh?
Yep. Did that and a few versions of you guys for some of the different shows, but yeah.
Well, let me tell you, because I have my own other business, which is being a lawyer, and I designed my own logo because I tried to describe to somebody what I wanted, and I couldn't quite put words to what I was seeing. So eventually, I got frustrated. I sat down. And I was like, all right, it has to be something like this. And it ended up being the early version of what my logo was. I've had that experience about a half a dozen times in different contexts through businesses and things that I've been trying to do until we met you.
Yeah.
and I'm not just saying that. I mean, here at Channel 511, we called you up and said, yeah, we want it to sort of look like a crate, and maybe that old crate lettering, that maybe it's burned on or something like that. And we got this back in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You had completed it. And that's not to say it was easy to do. I don't mean that. But you were able to hit the nail on the head. And I will say this also, and then I'll get back to you, which is what this is about. But I'll say this also, is that we had other folks that we were helping here at Channel 511. And it was the same thing. We said, we want a logo that looks sort of like this, sort of folksy, but old style or whatever it was, and you nailed it, right?
Yeah.
And that I think anybody who says they do fine arts and graphics and logo stuff, and maybe they know how to use the software, they know how to do the basics, but it's still art.
Yeah.
And it's not only visual art, but I think there's a communicative part of that you have to be able to deliver what the customer wants.
Yeah.
Have you had trouble doing that? I mean, I'm just curious. Like, you nail it.
Yeah, I mean, I talked with a little bit about the guys on Forge and Fire, but it didn't make the cut. But I was trying to tell them that sometimes like forced creativities can be difficult, right?
Sure, yeah.
Because a lot of times if you're inspired by something like a fine artist or a musician or whatever, a lot of times you hear them say, I woke up in the middle of the night and had this revelation of what it was going to be. That's a lot different than somebody like feeding you stuff and saying, here's what I'm trying to get, and maybe at that exact moment, maybe you ain't feeling any creative, or the kids are causing trouble, or the wife, or who knows what is going on right at that moment. I shouldn't say the wife; she don't cause any trouble. But.
No, she doesn't cause trouble. Do you have a process that you go through to try to force yourself through that or cram through that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's looking at maybe looking at other people's art. Can be inspiring, or if you might look at a different business. Like if I got a business that comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm a electric guy, but maybe I want a few of my trucks done or a fleet done," then maybe go to the internet and I'll start looking at other.
See what people have done.
Yeah.
And then expand on it, take it, make it your own,
or a lot of times it's like looking at the colors or maybe what they're into. As far as what business it is. I might have a certain idea already.
Or maybe what not to do, I suppose.
Yeah,
or
what to do, yeah.
What you don't like.
Right.
In a lot of ways, that's not totally different than what we have to do as a trial attorneys, right? I mean,
right.
I'm going to talk about, look, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to talk about it. But, I have to take a client or a client's cause. In my situation, it's typically criminal defense, and then find an argument that works, right? Now, there's some formulas that we use, like there's certain arguments I can just default to, and I have, but it is also very unique and it's very individual, and to get to the place where I can actually deliver an argument in a way that's compelling, I have to believe it and feel it, and it becomes a very emotional, personal experience, and I experience that also in things like playing music, when I'm playing guitar, or when I'm woodworking and things like that. You have to get to this place.
I fingered your guitar a little bit too, by the way, at Jared's.
Oh, did you? I got you. That's all right. I hope you did.
I said, what's the case over here? And I got it out and messed with it. I don't know.
So you're a musician too. That doesn't surprise me at all. That doesn't surprise me at all.
I play guitar, and I've been playing around with the mandolins a little bit lately. I bought a mandolin, I guess, about a year ago, which once I realized it's tuned like a guitar from the top to the bottom, 4 strings, but flipped upside down. So if you were looking at so once I had that revelation, it took me a few days. I'm like, man, what the heck is this thing? And I'm trying to look at chords and figure. And then once I realized it's tuned like a guitar, but in a mirror of it,
reversed, right?
Then I could figure it out quite a few chords pretty quick on it. And if you know a song on an acoustic guitar, then you can transpose it over to mandolin pretty quick.
I may have to try that.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift gears for a second. You've also, aside from the graphics, which obviously we know you're good at that, knives. How does that happen? How does one say, all right, I'm going to be a knife builder?
I guess years back, it was probably early 2000s. I was doing a lot more woodworking type of stuff, and so that led me, I forget where. I found online there was a company that had like pre-made knives that were already heat treated and cleaned up, and it was basically you're putting the wood. So for woodworking, it was a little woodworking project. If you go to Woodworks or Woodcraft, they've got pre-made knives in there you can buy.
I've never tried, but I've seen that stuff in there where you buy the steel and you can make a handle or do whatever.
So I did that with 2 knives that I made, one for my dad for Father's Day and kept one. And then after that, a bunch of his buddies all wanted them. And the boss, I was working at a graphics company, my boss there bought 2 for their sons, and it kind of started snowballing. A lot of people wanted them, and I thought, I want to make my own design. Back I'm an artist, so I didn't want to just be buying a cookie cutter knife that anybody could buy. So I thought, I'll make my own. Then that kind of snowballed into that. I had a machine shop that was directly behind the graphics shop that I was working at that had a contract with the military, and they were making leaf springs for some carts that were going all to Afghanistan, the Middle East, and they had like a 22-foot bar they were buying. They had a 4-foot drop off every, and it was good knives. They had the certifications, what it was made of, and everything. And I bought, well, first I was just getting some pieces from them.
Pieces of metal. And,
yeah, just chunks. They were giving me some little pieces to play with, and I kept kind of going back over and getting them from them. And then they finally looked at me and said, "Take it all, or it's going to the scrapyard." I said, "How much you got?" 3,000 pounds of it. He had 500 bars that were 4 foot long. And I bought it for, I said, "What's cash price?" And he said, $400. I said, okay. So I bought all them bars for less than $1 each. And I didn't know at the time. I found later a buddy of mine that's a steel supplier. And he figured out who I was. He said, "Man, you're Burton. I had all that steel." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why not? Did you sell for that cheap?" I said, "I didn't know. But I sold it for $6 a bar." Okay,
right,
for 500.
Seems like a pretty good bargain. Or a pretty good profit. I
Put 400 out and got back $3,000. And so then I bought my grinder and
built your shop.
Started it up pretty much.
When did you start? I mean, you were talking about buying steel at first, just sort of blanks, I'm going to call them, which is blades half made, or I guess mostly made. And I got to confess, I know nothing about forging a knife or building a knife or anything about it. But when does it go from that, and how does it go from that for a guy like you to actually whacking on red hot metal with hammers?
I guess it was a progress. I mean, I didn't for very long grind only, because I guess the grinding's kind of boring, right? And then you're kind of, if you got a piece of steel that's 1.5 inches wide, that's what you're stuck with, right? Yeah. If you're a stock remover is what the stock removal guy. There's a lot of I got a lot of buddies that are stock removal guys. It's if you're not set up for forging or in the city, I mean that can be a lot easier. Or for stainless steels, you don't usually forge a lot of stainless steel as much as your carbons. But I just ground for a short time after buying my KMG grinder, Beaumont Metalworks. He's right over here by Old Tangy, Lenox area there. Good guy, little shop there where he supplies a lot of the knife makers or grinders worldwide.
Really?
Actually, yeah.
Right here in
He's got a heck of a little shop over there, yeah. I need to go visit him, by the way. But then there was, I forget how, I was on one of the blade forums, bladeforums.com. It's the biggest knife forum out there, a couple 100,000 people in there. And there was an ad for like in Dayton or Troy, Ohio, a hammer in, they call them, where it's a big gathering of blacksmiths. And, there's classes going on all the time you can take. And I went and did that and forged my first knife there. Like another guy, 2 anvils, he do his thing, and then I do mine. Show you what.
Learn the ropes, so to speak.
And after that weekend over there in Troy, by the next weekend, I come home. By the next weekend, I had a anvil and a forge, and it was like took off. Kind of gets in you,
What's the name of the knife building business?
Burton Cutlery is what I called myself off, I guess, from the get-go.
And I presume now you take orders for knives and things, or is it?
I do take orders for them, yeah. And I sometimes build stuff just to sell. With the order taking, sometimes it can get overwhelming if you get too far, because I've had buddies of mine, knife makers, that really have 5-year wait list. Yeah. You put in an order and you're not getting your knife for 5 years. Well, who the heck knows what I'm doing in 5 years? I don't know. What are you doing in 5 years? I mean,
sure.
Are you going to still want to buy a $1,000 knife or a $500 knife, or
Well, I think if anybody wants the quality of handmade in this day and age, that's sort of the process. Yeah. I mean, that's what you end up having to do. I mean, I've considered doing that with a classical guitar. I've considered doing that with some other things. And, I tell people all the time, like in the professions or in the trades or in the artist arena, good ones are busy. It's like, if they're not busy, you should maybe try somebody who is busy, right? So,
so it's like a restaurant or anything. You pull up at a restaurant at lunch or dinner and the parking lot's full. But then the next door's got like 2 or 3 cars. I mean,
Right.
what's that tell you?
Yeah, what's that tell you? Right.
Yeah, they got good food at the one. That's why it's busy and packed.
Now, let's shift gears for a second, because we're going to get back here probably in the next segment. I'm going to ask you all about metal and how to do this. But before we get there, I was fascinated to learn that you actually have gotten involved with donating some knives for charitable purposes, working with Green Berets, etc. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah, Chad Williams in Delaware, member of the Green Beret Foundation, they contacted me a couple years ago to make a knife for their fundraiser that they do there in Delaware.
What's the Green Beret Foundation? What's your understanding of
The
that?
Green Beret Foundation, is giving money back to the Green Berets that have been wounded, in combat or action.
So it's a charitable organization,
yeah.
501c3. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they do. I mean, it's a nationwide thing, but then there's chapters of it, So they're gathering up for money for guys that are going out there and putting it all on the line, for us back here to be
so
enjoying our freedoms.
Right. So you can have a forge in your backyard.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So it's nice to give back something to them. And so the second year I've done it now. This year's the second year, and become friends with those guys. And then now this year I built a V42, which was the original knife given out to the 1st Special Forces group.
All right, describe V42.
The Devil's Brigade. The V42 is sort of a spin-off of, pretty sure it's like a British special Sykes Fairborn type of a dagger. It's a four-sided blade. It's a dagger is made for piercing, basically.
And it's got a history with the Green Beret of sorts.
Yeah. So I made that one for them for the fundraiser last year, and then now it is sort of turned into a project that there's a few of them being built right now that'll be the prototypes, and then it'll be put out there, made available to Green Berets, and part of that money will be going back into
the charity.
Yeah.
No, what a great cause, what a great idea.
Then another buddy of mine gave me an idea today of like maybe one time a year you donate one of those Green Beret daggers to a Green Beret, like maybe try to do some research or find out, somebody
who really would appreciate
right.
it, and well, certainly everybody would appreciate it. But yeah,
right.
That's interesting. To me, as I thought about this, coming into interviewing you here today and talking to you, knives. I guess like firearms, to some people they're tools, right? And I use knives to hunt. Everybody uses a knife in their kitchen to do something,
Oh, yeah.
And you've got one right here. I mean, this is one you made. We'll talk about in a minute, but it's a knife and it's a tool to the person who has it now. And this isn't to discount the ones that are very artistic or have a certain engraving or something on them. That's different, but it's a tool for me. But like for my grandson, after I'm gone, now it's an heirloom.
Right.
And, whether it's the 100-year-old knife that your great-grandfather used in the woods or doing whatever, or whether it's something special that was made, I mean, I guess they have value perhaps beyond just the steel and the tool part of it.
That's something that's always very interesting to me. I think that, you're building stuff that's going to be here for, I mean, there's knives and swords that are hundreds and 500 years old plus. I mean, and they weren't using the type of materials and the epoxies that we have and stuff like now. So if somebody, unless somebody drops a knife out in the woods or something, it's probably gonna be around 500 years from now, or 1,000 years from now. It could still, or if they live in a safe, like you said, if it's an heirloom and it's just getting passed down, I mean, and they're in a safe, I mean, they'd last, who knows? I mean, forever.
I know. It's not lost to me. I did remodel work on my house recently, and I had an old hammer, so, the old ones with the leather things. And it was just the first one I could put my hands on in my mess of a shop. And as I was banging with it, I thought, this was probably, I think it was my dad's uncle's hammer. And I started to do the math on how old that really was. And there's something to that.
Oh,
and I think if you have a knife like that or something that's passed down, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is my argument to say, or to answer the question, why would you buy an expensive custom-made knife? And I think because it has value perhaps beyond its usefulness right now. I mean, it's particularly if it's made with the input of a customer to an artist about what they want and what they would really like and how they're going to use it. I think that's pretty cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
let's do this. I really want to explore a little bit more about how knives are made, about the different metal options, etc. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of that stuff.
Cool.
All right?
Yep, sounds good.
Back from the break here with Burton Harruff. It's Harruff, right?
Yep, Harruff.
And again, Central City Graphics and Burton Cutlery.
Yep.
All right. Before the break, we sort of talked about knives, and I promised I was going to get into how the heck a knife is built, what makes a good knife, a bad knife, and everything in between. Help me out here, man. I mean, to me, a knife is something I just go buy in a store until I started to get into this, watching the show,
right.
Forged in Fire, and talking to you. But what makes, like you built this knife, for instance, what goes into this, and how does one build this?
Well, that one was a piece of 5160 spring steel that I forged out. And
now, when you say forged, well, actually, let's start with the steel. 5160. Like you're speaking Greek to me here, but I assume there's grades of steel that you're talking about.
Yeah, and the 60 is how many points of carbon is in 5160. A little lower carbon, but very tough steel. It's a spring steel. I mean, leaf springs are traditionally, when you've seen on the show on there.
Yeah, somebody.
There's the car. What part are you gonna go take off a car to build a knife spring?
Really?
And there's people do. You've seen on the show. People didn't know that are gonna go try to get this or that or something stupid off the car. But that's what's carbon. High carbon, and makes a heck of a tough knife.
Well, walk me through it. I go steal a leaf spring off a car.
You really don't want to do that if you can avoid it. I mean, some people, I do know a lot of blacksmiths and have friends that are salvage blacksmiths, what you'd call, but I get worried about something that's been on a car too long. Or I had a guy bring me a coil spring off a bulldozer that his dad ran, and he wanted me to make a knife out of it, and forged it out, and it just literally pretty much fell apart. It probably had, bad steel to begin with, or it's been abused on a bulldozer for years. But if I was to get a bare piece of steel, I generally, in the forge.
What's a forge? So I get a hunk of metal, and a forge is I just picture it like on the show. You stick it in this oven thing, and it is really hot, and it melts it red hot, or gets it red hot.
Coal, is a traditional, but then you're, either pumping, which I did just get an old coal forge to play around with. It's open, so you're not really constrained to when you see the forges on the show, you got to hold this big. So, for blades, perfect. But if you're wanting to kind of do some other ornamental stuff, sometimes people want me to. So it's kind of nice to have it open. But propane is what a lot of people use, a propane forge. It's quick. Yeah,
you heat up the metal in your forge, and you pull it out, and then people are banging on it on the anvil. Right. And that's just to flatten it out to a rough shape. Is that the deal?
Or in there you see the big blue, or they got the presses on there. Kind of knocks them down. I got a press. I got a small power hammer. I don't use much in the city. My press gets probably most use. That saves your shoulder and your elbow.
Once you get it to shape, what's the next in the process?
Yeah, once forged to shape, usually you run through some normalizing cycles, which is basically just trying to get that steel back to where it was before you just beat the crap out of it. So you basically rearranged everything in all the atoms in the steel.
You're talking microscopically rearranged.
Yeah, if you were looking at it on the microscopic level. So you run through a series of heats where you're bringing it up close to critical temperature and letting it cool slowly back down. And you're just trying to get everything lined up before the heat treat, which is what you always see on the Forged in Fire is the big flame up. But that's basically bringing it up to critical temperature. And when you go from the 1525 or whatever it is to your oil, I can't remember exactly the charts, the metallurgical charts, but I think it drops from 1500 degrees to like 8, 7, 8, I don't know, maybe not quote that, in like a half a second. You got to make that curve that quick. So a lot of times that's why you see the violent, the flame up there that they got going on the show. But it has to make that curve real fast, or you don't get a hard knife.
Well, and we got a lot I got some questions to follow.
I was gonna say, I just put about
you just went like from one to 100.
Yeah,
I got my hunk of metal. I got my hunk of metal. I'm now going to bang it or shape it with either some sort of power press, a hammer, or good old fashioned elbow grease.
Usually it's a combination of all of them. Yeah.
Is that when I start to grind it yet or shape it?
Oh, no.
Okay, so I got
forging in the bevels. A lot of times, you'll start pull the bevels out on the cutting edge, and getting your handles. Like I said, when you refine the bar stock, a lot of times, you refine the width of that bar stock. So if you need a blade that's got a tip or a different shape to it,
you get it roughly banged out. Now, when you say hardening it, that is where you're talking about bringing it almost to critical temperature and then letting it cool and doing that?
Yeah, that's more like the normalizing.
Okay.
The normalizings. And that's just when you're forging the steel, you mess it up. You like you said, on a microscopic, molecular level, what was all rearranged in nice cubes have basically just been like smashed, flattened, bushed all over the place, right? So you're bringing all those atoms back up into sort of a liquid solution, which they do. So, metallurgically, said, if you're looking at it microscopically, it's liquid, right? You still have a solid form, but if you were looking at that, the atoms are just jumping. Yeah. They're everywhere. So that's where, you're kind of letting them sort of get back to where they are supposed to be before you harden or you quench in the oil, because if you don't, that's where sometimes you might get a warp or pull it out.
I got some questions about the oil on that because I watched the show on TV, or I've seen maybe on YouTube or somebody doing this. They pull it out of this fire or the forge, and you call it quenching. What kind of oil is that? Or I thought, why not just water for that matter?
Well, there's some guys that use water. It's more of a brine solution. It's a certain part of salt to water because you'll crack it. It's too quick.
Gotcha.
Right? It might be. I don't know what. Like I said, I'd have to see like metallurgically. Scientists would laugh at me, I imagine. But if you're quenching it, it might be hitting from 1,500 to 500 or something in that half a second that you jam it in there, and then you ping, you hear it ping, or you hear on the show, they talk about the deaded ping. Whenever you hit the oil and you hear ping, it's probably something broke, cracked.
It's cracked. And that's, but it seems so ironic to me that it'll like either crack or like be really strong and as hard as it gets, because that's the hard. Can you do that more than once? Can you reheat it and do that again, or is it does that compromise the metal?
No, not really. I've reheat treated them a few times. If you're trying to do the hamones on a knife, which is like the Japanese technique of putting clay down the spine, and then that really is leaving the spine of the knife softer, and when you quench it, then your cutting edge. It's really more of a technique that's probably more beneficial in swords, and back then it was sort of developed for like the samurai type of swords. Don't quote me on that because I ain't sure, but they wanted the spine of the sword to be able to flex, but the cutting edge be hard.
Just because the qualities or how you use a sword, I guess, makes sense.
Right.
Yeah,
so
it keeps it from being brittle and breaking, I imagine. That's the logic behind it.
But if you're doing that technique on, blades with the clay coating,
Now
I lost my train of thought.
No, it's all right. We'll get it right back on. This one, you did all the stuff you're describing with this knife.
Yep.
Except not a hamone.
No, not a hamone on that one.
Now, after this comes out of the oil, after it's been quenched, what is next?
Next is the tempering, because when it comes out of that oil, it's as hard as it's going to be. That steel is as hard as possible, but it's brittle as well. So when you're tempering it, there's charts that you follow. Rockwell hardness is how they measure steel in the Rockwell scale, and how hot you temper it.
How do you temper? What is
it? Goes right back into oven.
So you heat temper it. Is
heat tempering it, and it's usually compared to 15, or if you're at 1525 degrees for heat treating, your tempering is like 450 degrees.
Gotcha.
But see, when it comes out of that oil, it's as hard as it could be, but it's very brittle as well. Like you could probably slam it and slap it on the anvil and break.
So is tempering?
Tempering is taking the hardness out, but then at the same time as the hardness is going out, the toughness is increasing, right?
Or maybe some flexibility or less brittle, I guess.
Yeah, so you walk a line there because usually with like a kitchen knife, you would temper it a lot less. And you want the kitchen knives to be real hard.
Right.
Versus, if it's going to be like a hard used knife.
Like this one, for instance. This has been tempered, but not as much as a kitchen knife.
It's a little bit softer because, they might be hitting bone or deer, but that one's still probably fairly hard, but not too far off.
Once you've got the tempering done, is that when the grinding and the shaping?
Yeah.
And...
Once your tempering's done, usually two 2-hour cycles, and you got to let it cool down totally in between cycles, when you're running your tempering. And so after that, now you can start grinding it. And
now, is there the shape of knives? I mean, you can look like this knife, for instance. I mean, this is a pretty classic looking hunting knife. What goes into this? People talk about different points, different shape, or different. I know people talk about clip point, drop point, and all. Yeah. How does that factor into what you do? I guess the intended use?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that sometimes can be preference, but it's used to. That's just like you said, a classic drop point hunter. It could be an all-around type of knife. With the clip points, or there's a lot of them false edges people are doing on top where it looks like it's sharpened like a certain way down on the knife, but it ain't. A lot of that may be aesthetic. Then
handles? You're making handles too, right? I mean, this is all custom. What's your preferred material for that?
I like wood or natural materials. I have done some micarta or the synthetic stuff if requested. I'd prefer burls or sandbar stag is real nice, but that can be tricky and it's getting real expensive because it comes out of like Southeast Asia, and there's a big embargo on it because of the United States put an embargo on it years back because of the poaching that was going on over there, because they saw the value of it in the United States. They wanted to kill as many as they could to get the antlers here. Yeah. And then that caused a big problem with that sandbar stag. But I got a nice little stash of it that I bought years back. And mammoth ivory is fun to work with, which is...
Mammoth ivory?
Yeah, it comes out of the Alaska or Siberia, a lot of it. One of my buddies lives up in Mansfield. He makes several trips up to Alaska a year to the Eskimos, and will bring back mammoth ivory, and it makes a beautiful knife handle. Now,
I can't. It's hard to describe how sharp this is, but really freaking sharp. I think.
Oh yeah, it's sharp.
I've struggled with this my entire life. I'm typically one of those guys that can do just about anything with my hands and build it or fix it, but sharpening knives is a struggle. I never learned the process. Tell me a little bit. This is more my own curiosity than anything. Can I screw it up? And can you fix it if I do screw it up? And is there a proper way to sharpen this thing so it doesn't screw it up?
There's a lot of ways. And like I said, that could be, depending on who you're talking to, it could be a heated topic for sharpening. But
it seems like everybody has their way.
They got their way. It's the best way, right? But most of the time I sharpen mine on the belt. And I know a lot of makers that do, and usually fast. I mean, maybe faster than some people might want to know. Depending on how long you've sat with a stone or something, I don't know. So, but I could probably put an edge on that knife, I'd say, and I doubt it would take me 5 minutes.
I got
2 or 3 minutes probably.
And it's back to where it was when it was new?
Razor sharp.
I got asked this too, because I've used knives, hunting or elsewhere, that $20 are cheap knives. They're good once, and then they seem dull.
Yeah.
And then I have a hard time getting them sharp again. I mean, I give them to somebody and they can get them fairly sharp, but what's the deal there? Is it the type of steel they use, or what is it?
Probably the type of steel, without knowing, what brands they were. But and then the heat treat. I don't know on a mass scale if you're trying to, heat treat thousands of knives like in a factory. Buck knife, or I'm not disparaging any knife, certain knife, but I'm just saying I imagine they're probably being made by the thousands and probably being heat treated by the thousands, and so I don't know how the quality control would be compared to somebody that's doing one knife at a time, and now you've spent hours making this knife to this point, so you're really like conscious of this is going to be right, not here's coming 1,000 knives down a conveyor belt, and hey, if a couple of them ain't right, we just pitch them out and keep moving. Now I've spent like 8 hours making the Damascus, and how many hours forging, how many hours grinding to get to this point of putting it in that oil. Is it going to be right?
Well, you've already you beat me to it, because you mentioned the word Damascus, and I've heard Damascus knife. I confess I'm ignorant about all this stuff. I'm fascinated by it, but ignorant by it. What the heck's Damascus mean? What's the idea of that?
Damascus steel is usually, it's just created by 2 different types of steel, or it could be several types of steel, I guess, but layered up. Generally, one of the steels has a higher nickel content than the other. So after you've forge welded it together, which happens at 2250, 2300 heat with a flux, certain type of flux, borax. It seems funny, but like the 20 mule team borax you can go buy creates a flux that.
You mean flux like I would use soldering or?
Yeah, creates an environment that keeps, impurities out of the faces. And then, when you get 2250, 2300, that becomes a solid bar.
And is that, when I hear of Damascus knife, I picture the knives that have like, all the designs or waves in them or whatever that would be. Are they better? Are they worse? Are they just decorative? And I imagine at some point in history there was a reason that had to happen.
Yeah. Historically, it was to refine the metals and sort of even out the impurities, I guess, across the blade, instead of having maybe the one big bad inclusion of something that was bad in the steel back then. Nowadays, it's probably more decorative. I mean, some people think it gives a toothy edge because you got 2 different kinds of steel. And once those are welded together, it would look like a regular mono steel until it's etched in an acid. Now, the acid will eat the one steel away, but it doesn't. The other steel that's got a nickel content, it resists the acid. So now you're seeing the pattern. Depending on the patterns, there's guys that do mosaic patterns that look crazy, that you would think it's computer generated almost, and like, how in the world are these guys doing this? But
so the pattern has become the art. It's
exactly.
It's always fascinating.
The Damascus is an art form, like you said, because now like certain guys are great at it, certain guys aren't. But any Damascus almost looks good. Like, it's cool. Just a random Damascus pattern is what a lot of these daggers and stuff I've been doing. So not really patterning it at all.
Just whatever it ends up at.
But it looks great.
How necessity, form, and function all meet together, and it creates what we perceive as pleasing aesthetically or artistic. Yeah. I know in woodworking, like the raised panel door, right? There was a reason for that, because wood expands and contracts, and if you didn't have a panel floating in the frame, the doors would split apart, right? Or it wouldn't. They had to do it that way.
Right.
But now it's what everybody wants,
Right.
So
wood, it's always been burl, or if you got a nice, ambrosia maple or something that's got some flaming or color in it, that's appealing compared to a cabinet that's just made of oak. And not that oak ain't beautiful, but
it's just what
you get some real flame, something that's got some color to it. Now that, is it's the same with the knives. This knife has been, it's funny because this is it's an antique Westinghouse micarta, which started being made in the early 1900s, and this was used as an electrical insulator in factory.
Is that right?
Yeah. But the stuff is
it's a composite material then? It's not. Yeah.
It's a laminated, either phenolic material, either linen a lot of times, or they use paper, actually. But this stuff is real interesting because the outside of it's super dark, and you can tell, and I use the dark, towards the knife handle, and then the inside of it becomes this butterscotch. But my customers aren't interested. They want Damascus and they want burl. Or like I had a couple little ones that are on my website. I made 2 of them that were Damascus with mammoth ivory. I could have sold 10 of those. I've had people still, that knife you still get, no, it's gone.
Yeah.
So I'm like, people want the Damascus a lot. And burl, nice burl handle or something that's very interesting.
Well, I got some thoughts, and I'm gonna tell you what I like here probably soon. But
I like this, and the feel of that to me feels real nice. And like I said, I almost was gonna keep this for myself, just as I always sell my own knife.
I was going to ask.
I sell my own knives right off. I was talking to a knife maker buddy of mine yesterday, and I make a lot of them that are, neck knife, little, over the years, just little guys where you wear it on your shirt, right? And I always sell them off my neck. And actually, Mike, the episode of Forge and Fire I was on, he bought the one that I had with me.
Oh, is that right?
At the finale. Yeah, I just took it up there to show, and he wanted to take. I'm taking that back with me. But over the years, I've had, I don't know how many number of those, 5 or 6 of them, and somebody sees them and always buys them off my neck.
Well, you mentioned Forge and Fire, and I'm going to get to that. We're going to take a break, but when we get back, I promised this from the beginning, the show that's now made you world famous, I'll say. Right there. But no, I want to hear all about the experience, what it's like to be on a reality show, how real was real, and what your thoughts on the whole thing was, are. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll come right back and talk about that. All right, back here with Lawyer Talk. Steve Palmer here, talking to Burton Harruff. I promised everybody the Forged in Fire experience. You were on the show, and just to recap here, Forged in Fire, a show on the History Channel.
Yep.
I don't know how long it's been running, but I guess when I saw it, it's maybe a lot like whatever, the Iron Chef or one of these where there's like a competition. I think you guys started with 4 folks.
Yeah.
And you have competitions and challenges to build knives, and there's judges, there's testing, and all sorts of stuff. I got to ask you, man, how on earth of all the people in the country or the world, did you end up on Forged in Fire?
They'd actually contacted me for several of the seasons before, but I was going through a lot of stuff and moving my shop that I was set up in, so I just sort of ignored the emails because I wasn't set up to want to go, and the time commitment, and I might have a shop set up that I could get the work done I needed. So after moving and getting my stuff all set up again, they started following, one of the production people or something started following me on Instagram, and I thought, that's kind of odd again. Then I looked in my email, and in the spam folder it jumped in there. We're trying to contact you again. We've tried in the past, and would you have any interest in coming on? We'll try you one more time. And it was the right time. I figured I'd go for it. My kids were pumping me to go, and
I bet.
And the wife was pumping me to go. And so I was go try. I went into it just mindset of fun, but once you get through the first 2 rounds, then the competitive nature really took over.
Well, fun and competitive, right? They're sort of hand in glove.
And if you've seen how the show ends, then you know that I was really pissed off at the end of it, but I held myself together good on there.
Yeah, exactly. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Right? Let me back up a bit. Where is it? Where did you go for the show?
I believe they filmed it in Brooklyn, I think, originally, but it's in Connecticut now, so it's close to New York. But it's just right into Connecticut.
So it wasn't a big trip for you anyway here.
No, they fly you out, fly into JFK or wherever, LaGuardia actually, and then they drive you out there. It's not far.
Well, you get there, and I watched your episode just the other day. There are 4 people who have to do, say, a challenge. That means they unveil it. Now, I want to ask, and I understand maybe there's some trade secrets, maybe not, but how real is reality? In other words, they gave you 3 hours to build these daggers, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Did you really only have 3 hours?
Yeah, 3 hours, which that was a push. To forge 3, matching things in 3 hours time. I was scared. They asked me beforehand, when they're interviewing the pre-interviews, what are you scared of? I said, probably getting junkyard steel or crap steel. That I didn't know what it was because I do like working with nice steel. So when we did, the unveil, and there was that nice fresh bar, like brand new steel.
You're thinking,
no rust on them, like beautiful W1 I've worked with, and I felt pretty comfortable right there.
So you didn't know. And just so we're clear,
I had no idea what we were making. I had no idea what it would be.
And we've sort of hinted around, but let's just be clear. You had to make 3 of these throwing daggers, and they all had to match within a half ounce of each other in shape and weight and.
They had to be the same length,
balance.
Same width, and same weight, which was, I think, the first time they'd done that.
Now, you see this and you're thinking, I can't do that. Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't really think that. I just thought the drifted holes in the backs of them, which they didn't show me because one of mine jumps off and hits the ground because I was doing the tongs in the crotch, holding technique, and then trying to hit it and then jump. But they were showing Mike that, he was talking about, the problems of it, and they showed him a little bit more punching his holes. But that was probably the one thing I struggled with.
The other competitors, they seem like all pretty good people, and I imagine that's probably common in this kind of industry or trade.
Yeah, the knife making community has always been like, everybody's, I can't say everybody, but most people are real, eager to share and not competitive. And, there's been several occasions where, makers I've known have, maybe their shops have burnt down or they've had some problems, and the whole community will gather together and fundraiser and help this guy rebuild his shop, or hey, I got an extra anvil and I can give this to this guy, or and I've seen that over the years a lot of times in the knife making community. So yeah, it's a close knit, and you know people and from shows and the web and stuff, but we're all doing the same. And we all got the same mental disability of knife making, right? Metal working in general, yeah.
It looks like all ages and people from all over the country too. You had a younger guy. You had
Colin. Yeah, he's a real good knife maker. Crazy. That's what they were laughing about, because I even thought, I looked over at him and I seen him because that bar was 36, or I don't remember what that was, but it was 1.5 inches. It's pretty heavy. And I looked at that and I thought, cut it into 3 pieces, weld it onto 3 pieces of rebar, and do 3 knives at once. And I looked over and seen him stick the whole thing in there, and I was like, when you're 18, so.
You just figured. Yeah.
It's like the, whatever the old joke of the, the 2 things on the hill, and the one says run down, so that's walk down. The old guy says walk down, I don't want to tell the whole joke, but that's kind of the way it was. I looked over, I'm like, damn, this kid's doing all that, and he's got the whole bar in there, and I'm still using their old shitty chop saw to try to cut my thing up and get it welded on there. So he already was forging and having stuff going before I even stuck mine in the forge.
Now, how long does it take? I mean, because in your episode particularly, they were talking about the timing, or he's already got it in the forge, he's way ahead.
Right.
So elapsed time, we see on TV 3 hours, and you have to stick that metal in. How long does that take?
What, to heat back up in between cycles?
To heat it to where you can work it. I mean,
depends on the forge. With 10 minutes probably.
So you didn't have
15 minutes to heat back up.
Gotcha. Now, is it what we see? I suppose that. Well, let me rephrase this. You got to be under some pressure there. There's people watching, and in your shop at home, I imagine you don't have a host of production people and judges and other contestants.
And you got time to think through maybe stuff, okay, is this going to work, or is that going to, or maybe do a test, a lot of times you might.
Yeah, I'll try it
with a certain type of steel or something, you might try it or do a test before you jump right into it. But no, on that, you're seeing, and now you got 4 guys running around with hot steel, and I got yelled at. They didn't show it, but I got yelled at a bunch because I got a tendency, when I come out of the forge, I'm looking down the blade and trying to see if it's straight, right? As I'm walking from the forge back to the anvil, and I got yelled at constantly to carry down. You're supposed to carry it,
Yeah.
So you're not walking a 1800 degree piece of knife right into somebody's chest or something as you're walking around, or. Yeah. So I got yelled at a lot. They're like, "Pay attention, man! Look, carry down. Pay attention where you're going."
Did you bring with you your own set of tools?
I had a couple hammers that I brought, and I brought the bubble jig, which is a friend of mine, Fred Rowe, developed that, and it's like a floating bubble that you can set to an angle.
And they actually showcased that, right?
Yeah, they showed it for a quick second, which I figured they wouldn't say the name of it since you can't plug it or nothing. But
and he's got a patent. Well, we can.
Yeah, he's got a patent on it, and that's the bubblejig.com, bubblejig.com, and it's a neat little thing. He sold a bunch of them, mainly to knife makers, but there's been other construction people, or people that are running plumbing, and they got to keep a certain grade going down. I mean, you can set those to whatever angle you want,
and then you have it.
Yeah. So you just snap it on a. You see me on the show, just real quick split second they showed, but I had that set to whatever close angle I thought that those daggers were going to be, 10 degrees. I think is what I set it to, and kind of helps you just get an initial.
What you want.
Flat set into
it. Gives you a frame of reference if nothing else.
Yeah, because I just quickly did it and then took it off and did the next one and took it off and did the next one and then just free ground all those. That they don't show a lot of that. The grinding exciting to watch. But yeah, and then
Well, let's fast forward.
Yeah.
You end up, so you got through the first part, which is everybody's got to make their set of knives, and there's an initial judging of what the product is. And one of the gentlemen there, it looked like he was struggling to do it all by hand and ran out of time, or something happened, but his didn't quite fit the dimensions. So and then there are three.
Right.
So you made the initial cut, and now you've got to finish the knives. And
Yeah.
I think I saw on yours that there was a problem with yours too. It wasn't the right size or something you had to add.
Yeah.
So how did that go down?
Yeah, getting through the first round, I thought everything was right, and I remeasured them, I don't know how many times, and looked at them, but, like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on around you, and you're constantly, like, checking that clock, how much time I got left on it,
Right.
and it's ticking down. It don't stop. But now you got the camera guys are crawling. Like, at one point, I'm grinding, and I'm, like, sensing something. I look up, and the guy's on a ladder, like, above me, which I don't know if you're supposed to tell that or not, but you can see the shot, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's nothing wrong with disclosing that. But yeah, it's a lot different than when you're in a shop by yourself. Like you said, you got tunes going, it's relaxed atmosphere, and you're working compared to, people's crawling on. And not only that, but Mike and Colin and Monty are running around with their hot steel, and the hammers going, the forges, it's a lot of distraction. So I just tried to, like,
Yeah, you could see you were pretty focused on it.
yeah, I was trying to. And they're trying to, stop you every couple, they want to ask you, like, there's a few of them snippets where you see they're stopping you. It's like,
Well, I bet after you get the first round done, you're into the second, you have a chance to add the handles and sort of do the finishing on those daggers. Then comes, like, final judgment, man. I mean, it's like now they're throwing these things into these metal. I mean, it just seemed like, is it as nerve-wracking as it looks? I mean, everybody's sort of sitting there, like, when they pick up their knives, or the guys are sitting there, it's like, you can say, all right, I'm ready. And they do it. That's
well, even
all real.
before that, I had to make up into that second round. My one knife was a little 1/8 narrow.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, so I had to, and you can't turn the forges back on. Right?
What'd you do to fix it? I meant to ask you
So
that too.
I went to the torch. I was thinking about it. I thought, well, wipe a wet cloth around the cutting blade because it had already been heat treated, right? But all I had to do was widen out the very back of that 1/8 of an inch. So I just heated up that one little section and just a couple cracks and spread it out. And then you see, I go back to the grinder and I just hit it quick, and then I held it up. And I laughed because I think I got the only beep on the show, because I was like, oh man. But I said, I hope they don't constant roll on me, because I was like, I was cussing on their bad because it's work. But yeah, I see now. So now I had to go back to the torch because it had warped on me a little bit.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because when I spread it out, I didn't pay attention to that. I'm measuring the width's right. I didn't look this way. So I hit a couple times on the grinder and look, it's like this. And now I had to go back to the torch, heat it up, go like this. So it's like 20 minutes into the 2 hours we had in that second round.
And then everybody's, like, wrapping their handle, and it's like, by
Oh, them
then
dudes
you're
are
behind.
grinding like crazy. And I'm like 20 minutes. So I just started the grinder. So I was like, shit. But yeah, I caught way back up. And then they didn't show it on there, but my knives actually weighed all the exact. They was the exact.
Dead on.
Dead. I said I couldn't even have planned it. But I went over a couple times around the ring on the back, and I was like, okay, I'm like couple on close.
Well, you got a clock ticking, and you're trying to get them perfect. I mean, that's nerve-wracking, but you survived.
So then, I made it into the round 3, where they're actually going to throw it into the first test as throwing it into sheet metal. So, okay, well, hopefully everything, right?
The danger of that, I guess, is that it breaks a knife or something. Yeah,
they like to abuse them, see what they can do on the show. But, you're probably not throwing knives into sheet metal, I'd say, very often. But no, mine didn't sustain any damage on that. And Mike's took a little rolling tip, and then when they brought out the silhouettes, with Doug throwing, mine did good, didn't take any damage. Mike's did good. Colin's third one snapped in half.
Yeah.
So on to the final, which he's a great kid, man. I mean, we've all become, I'm sure everybody that's been on the show that I've heard, those 4 people become friends. Like,
Yeah, well, you're
we're texting and calling and talking all the time, the 4, except for Monty. The first guy that got kicked out in a red shirt, he's a great guy, but he's He's more of a farrier, where he's a horseshoe, does horseshoes. But he lives like, out in Missouri, just like out in the middle of nowhere, I guess. And he ain't really a phone guy or an internet guy too much.
Looks like an old-fashioned guy.
He's an old-fashioned guy, real nice guy. He's called me a couple times and we've sat on the phone and talked, but you can't get a hold of him if you ever try to call him.
Well, the final challenge.
Back to Sunbury, Ohio.
They unveil this sword, and I'm looking at this thing. It's like a 9-ring sword.
Yeah, I don't know. It was kind of like, oh man, yeah. I think you see my reaction on TV. I'm like, what the? Because I was in my head in the kung fu, and I really didn't. I'm glad I didn't have to. I don't know if I'd have done any better or worse, but I had in my head the 3. I don't know what them things are called. It's like one long point, and it's got the 2.
Like a scepter.
And there's 2 of them.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I laugh because
Trident or something.
Napoleon Dynamite, he finds one like at the Goodwill and he wears it in his belt. And I think it's the funniest shit. But in my head, I had that in my head. I'm like, we're going to be making a pair of these things, know, because it's kung fu. And so yeah, when they unveiled that sword, I'm like, because I'd never made anything bigger than I got 12-inch blade.
So they follow you back to Sunbury, Ohio, to your shop, set up cameras. I mean, all that's what we see, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's accurate.
Had 4 days. They took a day off, I guess, on this season, because it used to be 5 days. Took a day off, so you got 4 days at your home shop. And, yeah, it's long days, 10-hour day.
No, it's a spoiler alert here. You make your sword. Actually, I'm not going to spoil it yet, but you had to drill all these 9 holes, and you were struggling.
Oh, yeah. It had work hardened, and my shop wasn't really set up for something that big, so I didn't really have my oven I'm working with the kid that was on the show, Colin, actually, with the ponytail. I shouldn't say kid, he's a nice guy, but he's got a nice sword forge that I've been picking his brain on. I need to build one like that. So that I can heat treat, because I have a couple of them, exact replicas of the 9-ring sword, 2 of them that I forged that will be.
Since then,
and I'm going to start documenting them on Instagram and go through the whole thing again. Fun.
Do you know what you would do differently to not have the problem drilling those holes?
Yeah. After mine, well, like I said, I don't know if you're supposed to tell the spoiler, but yeah, if I could have annealed the thing successfully, it would have made the drilling a lot easier.
Yeah. So now at the end you go back and they're doing these tests on this big hunk of it was a pig, I think. It was
kind of a weird scene there, because it was almost a little bit satanic or something. I hate to say that, but because it was a lot darker really in the studio, I think, and it was more red, than what you're kind of seeing on the show. I don't know if they tweaked that and but yeah, you got this fog running in, right? And right underneath the pig, you really couldn't see it, but I'd say that big of a circle, right, the fog wouldn't go, right, because there's blood. I'm sure there's heat there, right, and it's kind of weird, and you're going like standing there waiting. So yeah, it was a weird scene, but yeah, Doug's takes off, and the first hack he made into it, I seen him smile, and he kind of looks over at it, because the thing was sharp, and I tested it on a log at my house, and they didn't tape it, and they were pissed off at me, because there's an hour left. I had an hour left. The sword was done.
To hand it in. And you're whacking a log?
I walked outside in my driveway and I had a cherry log there and I whack! And then I picked the log up with the sword and them guys were like, what the? I said, hey, they should have. They were mad that they didn't
do it now.
Yeah, they got mad that, no, because I said I'd rather it broke there, because if it had broke right then, I'd have been screwed. I mean, I couldn't have showed back up. With half a sword. So, but yeah, I had a hell of a time drilling them holes, and I'd caused the stress riser in the center hole.
And that's what caused it to break.
I think it was in the 3rd or 4th whack, that pig went in half. And they didn't show my face, but I was like, hell yeah, because I thought like that was the end of it. I mean, they chopped the thing in half, it's fall down. So now he's having to cut up higher.
Yeah.
And he gets it up towards the pelvis, which I posted on the History Channel's thing they put on there. And I said, I think that pig had a titanium plate in its hip or something. I couldn't see.
So it breaks. And you can see his face. I mean, I got to tell you, maybe I'm biased because you're sitting right here in the Lawyer Talk set, but I think you had it, man. I think yours looked awesome. And nothing against the other guys either. I mean, that looked awesome too. If I'd have seen his, I thought it's and then I saw yours. I was like, boy, that's a pretty cool. And then when you started to whack that, I thought you had it, but it broke. So
snapped right in the center hole.
$10,000 whack.
So then we had, they still had to test Mike's, and if his would have broke, I would have won, because mine was there's stuff that, Mike had some obstacles in the final challenge that they didn't show on the TV, which I wondered if they would or not, but yeah, he kind of got pushed back a little bit too. And like I said, it was totally out of my wheelhouse. I never made a sword before, especially a 9-ring goofy thing.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of a goofy thing, because to me, those rings they said they were for intimidation factor, but when I chopped, because I got the sword back in 2 halves, right? And my gun case back that I shipped it in. But I took that thing and hacked it into a piece of hickory as hard as I could, and it stops at the rings. I mean, the rings are a stop.
Yeah, so it wouldn't, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna get to one more thing here before we wrap this up. But would you do it again?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
They asked me, "Would you come on for the redemption show?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, the redemption shows sometimes are $50,000." I said, "Now you're piquing my interest. $10,000, I don't know."
Maybe, right? Yeah.
Well, $10,000's hard when you're self-employed, right? I mean, I had to shut down for 3 weeks.
No, I get it. I get it, man.
So at the end of that, when that thing busted, I was like, because it was, yeah.
Well, look,
not making any money for 3 weeks.
No, it's hard to do.
Because I thought, okay, $10,000, that's a good month's work. But no,
that's a commitment. Well, look, let me just we're going to wrap up here in a second, but let me just ask you, man. I'd like to commission some knives.
Awesome.
I've got my 12-year-old watches the show.
Yep.
And out of the blue, like I said, he started to ask me about this show. And all the while, I sort of knew in the back of my head, well, we work with Burton. He's coming on to Lawyer Talk. I'm gonna spring this on you.
Cool.
I would love to commission a set of knives. I like to hunt. I like to fish. We do a lot of the butchering.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could get maybe a set of knives. I can bring my son in, or maybe surprise him, one or the other. I haven't decided what. But we can
tell him you're taking him on a road trip, and then bring him up to the house. We can set it up between us and tell him.
That would be awesome.
Bring him up to the shop,
and
then we can pick through some stuff.
We can maybe document it with the crew here at Channel 511, and really show some of the other stuff, and build some knives at the same time. So everybody, stay tuned. I think that's awesome.
Cool. And looking forward to it.
I don't want to jump the Green Berets in line. But maybe I can jump some other people. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Don't jump the Green Berets. They're tough.
I don't want to get ahead. I don't want to get ahead of them. But
you want those guys to be on your side always.
I couldn't thank them enough.
Me neither. They're great guys, man.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Again, you're sort of one of the crucial components anyway here to Channel 511. You work great with our production folks, and now you got an awesome story to tell. And nationally famous, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway, this is Steve Palmer here with Burton Harruff here on Lawyer Talk. And stay tuned, because we're going to have more with Burton, but on location.